So we have a new lightweight champion. Islam Makhachev was able to defeat Charles Oliveira at UFC 280 in a brilliant performance. And in this video, I want to break down some of the things that he did in order to capture the title. But before I start, if you haven't seen the extensive breakdown of this fight that I did before it happened, make sure you check that out because I'm going to reference some of the points that I brought up in that video. And it's also just a deep dive into Islam's game and also some of Oliveira's. So if you like technical analysis and breakdowns like that, I think you'll really enjoy that video. But for now, let's go ahead and hop into Islam's performance and how he was able to win the title. Okay, so starting off here at the beginning of the fight, Oliveira right away, with his signature style, takes the center of the cage to apply pressure, start to push Islam towards the fence with that aggressive shoot-a-box style that he has. You know, that's what Oliveira does great. It's what he does best. He wants to push you towards the fence, cause damage, and look to lock up one of those subs if he can, if not a TKO. So, you know, he kept that on brand here and immediately starts putting Islam on the back foot. But Islam responds right away with a counter left straight and a right hook over the top. Now, a couple things I want to point out about this. Number one, Islam did this to gain some respect from Oliveira and try to back him off, not let him get in that high pressure groove right away, backing him up to the fence. But this was also significant because this is the same exact combo that Poirier was landing on Oliveira over and over again. In the last video, I talked about how I thought Oliveira may have some trouble with the southpaw fighter because he's been fighting a lot of orthodox guys except for Poirier, who was able to land the left straight and the right hook over the top a lot. Looking at that fight here, the exact strike, you know, that Poirier was able to land is the first strike that Islam opened with and landed on him. And again, Poirier would land that right hook over the top over and over again. So that was a combo that stood out to me, and it was interesting to see that just come into play right away with Islam backing him off. You know, Islam wasn't going to allow Charles to push him towards the fence, and he didn't allow that in a few ways, which I'll get to here in a second. Another thing that Islam did, and he did in the Bobby Green fight, is he uses that lead hand as like a probe, and he also deflects kicks with it. So right away when Charles went to use his front kick, which is another one of his great weapons, Islam deflected it with that lead hand right away. It did not hit the target, and he was able to swat that away. So right away Islam established this presence to where, you know, he was not going to be back to the fence. If you were going to pressure him, you were going to eat a left straight for it. You were going to eat a right hook, or when I say you, I mean Oliveira. So right away, Islam just established off the bat that he's not going to allow himself to be pressured to the fence by Oliveira. You know, Oliveira is going to eat a left straight or a right hook over the top, if, you know, if he gets too close to that fence. And if he tries to throw his front kicks, he may deflect some of them too, like he did here. So taking away some of Oliveira's best weapons right off the bat. So as the fight goes on here, Oliveira gets Islam very close to the cage. And this was a point where Oliveira felt like he could probably land a pretty hard shot here because he starts to sit down on this punch. Now, Islam, knowing that he's very close to the fence, has two options here. It's either circle out or engage in the firefight. If he engages in the firefight, even if he lands a punch, it might cause a clinch situation where he's pushed up against the fence, which isn't necessarily a problem, which I'll get to that also in the fence battle. I mentioned before that Islam is not afraid to circle out if he feels like he's in danger or being pressured by an opponent, by an aggressive opponent. He's not going to get into wild, crazy firefights. He's not going to brawl. At least most of the time, he's not going to. So here Charles goes to sit down on this punch, and Islam decides to just disengage. Charles just ends up not throwing the punch at all because of that. Islam just darted out of range. He was not afraid to just get out of there and reset and not allow Charles to start gaining momentum towards the fence. He went from being over here, you know, if you look at this logo on the ground, to where he ends up. You know, he ends up way over this way, so Charles has to follow him. Huge gap in between them. He has to come chase him. So this encounter was won with the footwork. I want you to pay attention to Islam's foot position here and what's going to happen as they engage to throw a punch. So as they step in, they both throw a punch. They miss. Islam starts to bring this hand over the top, but more importantly, look where Islam's foot is. He ends up on the outside of Charles with this perpendicular angle. So he has the dominant angle here. He's off to the side of Charles, which is going to be very awkward for Charles to try to turn into. So Charles clashes into Islam here, and you can see that Islam's foot is still on the outside. Again, very awkward position. Islam's got his arm over the back of Charles here, and it evolves into this. He ends up getting the body lock on Islam, which gives Islam double overhooks. But again, the battle is won and lost here at the feet. Charles is already falling backwards and to the side because Islam's knee is in the way, and he's in this very awkward position where he has to turn into Islam from that perpendicular position. So as a result, all Islam has to do is lean into those overhooks this way to finish the takedown because Charles is already on his way down. Islam rotates towards him, and, you know, Charles was already in the process of falling down over that leg that blocked his knee. You know, this knee is blocked right here. He can't step out and post as they go down. And another really interesting detail here by Islam is this post hand starts to come out. Now, he posted this hand because as they're falling, Islam's body body is kind of high up on Charles' chest. So he's at risk of being rolled by Charles this way and toppling over the top. So as they fall, he catches himself here with this post hand, and you can see that he stops himself from toppling over this way. You can see his body, his momentum is heading that way, and Charles has this body lock to where if he continues to roll this way, he would have taken Islam over the top potentially and ended up on top himself. So this was a really, really slick, fast thinking move slash reaction. So when he gets his base back, Islam ends up back in this tripod position that I had mentioned before in the last video. Islam prefers to pass from the tripod position and ideally to get this half guard position, or to start to set up the half guard position of having this leg in between his own. So right away he starts with that. He has two arms to post, has a lot of stability, and all Charles can really do here is hold on, try to keep his posture down to prevent ground and pound, and to maybe pull guard. So Charles Oliveira, knowing that he's in a tough spot, decides to pull close guard here, and that begins the ground battle, which I'll get into next. One thing I wanted to touch on real quick is in the last video I had said that this fight may look a little bit like Fedor versus Nogueira. You know, you had the Russian Sambo wrestler grappler in Fedor against Nogueira, the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu boxer who also had some Muay Thai, but Nogueira was generally regarded as the best submission artist, especially at heavyweight back then, and it was a really dangerous fight for Fedor, but he decided to fight in his guard where he was best and sit there in the teeth of his guard, throw strikes, you know, shrug off submission attempts, etc. And he got the best of Nogueira doing that, and that was mind-blowing to people back then. So I was wondering, you know, those styles obviously mimic this fight, you know, with Islam's Sambo and wrestling background, Oliveira's jiu-jitsu and all that, and I wanted to show you that these two fights actually mimic each other in an eerie way. So this was actually the third fight with Fedor and Nogueira. A lot of the comparisons I was making before refer to the first fight. The first exchange with Islam and Charles Oliveira when they go to the ground reminded me of this exchange in the third fight of Fedor and Nogueira, and like I said, it's almost eerie. Check this out. So Fedor throws this punch and steps in to close quarters with Nogueira, and as he does, he takes the outside foot position just like Islam did against Charles Oliveira, and it blocks Nogueira's knee. So as they begin to clinch up and Fedor comes over the top, he's able to block this knee, and Nogueira again is stuck in this weird position like Oliveira was where his knee is blocked. He can't post, and they're rotating this way. Now Fedor also hooks his leg here and trips him, but it's that same outside foot position, rotating takedown, even to the right, and coming over the top here, and he's able to throw Nogueira to the ground. So yeah, just an interesting little tidbit there, but let's go ahead and move on to what happened on the ground with Islam and Charles and how Islam was able to shut down Charles' guard. All right, so now we're on the ground, and Oliveira decides to pull close guard from this position, and right away he decides to throw up a submission threat. He's going to threaten the triangle here by pushing this arm in while holding the clinch, and to try to get Islam on his back foot, defensive, thinking about attacks coming his way rather than, you know, pushing into Oliveira's guard, applying pressure, ground and pound, things like that. So he decides to go for this triangle, and I want you to pay attention here to Islam's shoulder position. So he's pretty straight on with Charles here. Charles is trying to cut the angle on him in order to throw up this triangle, and as soon as he does that, Islam now shifts his shoulders off to the side and starts to rotate while also bringing this foot up. Now that allows him to push into Charles and lift his hip up off the mat, which is going to help apply pressure to his guard and make it harder on Charles to actually hit this triangle. And by doing this, it also opens up this gap right here. Islam is going to be able to punch his arm upward here to break this triangle attempt or this high guard attempt. So as he does that, he decides to start posturing up, and it's a little bit blurry here, but you're going to see this hand come up. You can already see the clinch starting to break here because he has again shifted his body this way and started to posture up. He comes all the way up here, and he brings his arm with him on the inside of the guard. And at this point, Oliveira has lost that clinch position around his neck, and he has lost wrist control of Islam's arm that is now broken free here. So after Islam postures up out of that triangle attempt, he's pressing into the mat heavily here with his feet on his toes, call that active toes and grappling, starts pushing into Charles' guard, you know, hip first, just really applying a lot of pressure to his legs. And it's hard to tell here, but Charles' hips are still off the mat here. So he's not able to move effectively. He's just got a lot of pressure coming down on this guard, can't close his guard, and Islam is just constantly pressing into him. Now as Islam is pressing into him, he comes back down for a second, and Oliveira uses this opportunity to shoot another triangle. Now this was his best attempt of the whole fight right here. He gets this arm pushed through, he pushes Islam's arm back through his legs, and he's starting to bring this hand over to try to get head control here to keep his posture broken and get this high guard position to shoot the triangle. So he shoots it over the top, and he's actually in pretty pretty good position here. He's got head control over Islam. Islam's posture is broken. He's in this round back position, which is not optimal. His arm is isolated on the outside, so Charles has his other arm stuck on the inside, and this looks like a pretty good triangle attempt. Like, this has all the makings of a good triangle. So once Oliveira catches this position, Islam responds by immediately trying to back out and to pull his head out, and to also open up a gap here for his arm to be able to shoot through to get his arm back on the inside. You know, typically with triangle defense, you want both arms either in or both arms out while you're sitting in somebody's guard to prevent the triangle attempt to start with. So he goes for the defense here of trying to get his arm back in to have both arms on the inside and to square back up with Oliveira. And also by doing this, he's starting to get a more upright posture, which is what he needs as well. You know, his posture's been broken. It still is broken. His back is still rounded, but he's already starting to get a little more upright here and more in line with his hips. So he ends up being able to punch his arm through because of that space that he created by backing up. And you can see his arm come through here, and now he's able to get even more upright. Again, his posture isn't perfect yet. He's still got this heavy weight of Oliveira's legs pulling him down right here, and you know, he's still got this round back shape, but he's in better position than he was before. Being in a better position now with both arms in, he still has his left arm trapped in a weird way. So Oliveira responds by grabbing his own shin to pull himself up off the mat here and to try to get more weight and more pressure on Islam's posture to bring him down and to also get his legs into a better position. Now, something interesting that Islam does here is he actually backs his arm back out, and he's going to use his forearm right here as a wedge against Oliveira's leg. So as Oliveira goes back down and Islam leans into him, he wedges his forearm on his thigh here, which creates this big area of space. And because of that, he starts to get his neck out even further, destroying the triangle, and Oliveira's come back down to the mat now, so he doesn't have as much leverage as he did before. And with this wedge starting to create distance between Islam and Oliveira right here, Islam is able to push with more force to back out of this triangle. So at this point, Islam is almost completely out of triangle danger. He's got a lot better posture. He's got this arm on the outside pushing into the leg. But one issue here is that his arm is stuck in this weird position like this. He's got his arm, it's his elbows forward, and there's some bad things that can happen from there, especially with someone as creative as Oliveira. So he's not fully out of the woods yet, but he's in a lot better position than he was before. Now, Oliveira fears that he's going to get stacked here. You know, Islam could use his hand here to push into him, throw his own body entirely towards Oliveira and stack his guard, and that would cause Oliveira to flip over this way. So Oliveira responds by starting to arch his back and to plant his hands here on the mat to try to give himself some stability to push back in towards Islam and prevent getting rolled over. So Charles is able to prevent the stack and to push back in, and he starts to hook this arm, which again, you know, Islam is he's almost out of triangle danger here. He's got a pretty decent defense. He's most likely not going to get triangled from this position just because Charles wouldn't be able to cut the angle, and you know, he's still got his hand here, but this arm is in danger. So this arm could potentially he could potentially go to omoplata. He could potentially shoulder lock him here. There's some weird things that can happen there when your arm is stuck in this opposition. So again, not fully safe yet. And Islam responds again by pushing off of this leg with that hand that was just there. So going back one frame, he's got this hand here. He's going to push on Oliveira's leg to create some space. He starts to back out, pushing like this and backing out. So as he does that, it creates this space right here to where he can fire his arm in again. And that's exactly what he does. He starts to fire this arm through so he can get both arms on the inside and hopefully square up with Oliveira's guard again and put himself in a lot better position to hopefully free this arm as well. You know, Islam needs to come back in and square his hips up with Oliveira directly to free this arm. So again, he continues to fire this arm through. He's also going to bring this shoulder through, which is going to put a lot of pressure on the guard. So at this point, it's a bit blurry, but he's got his arm coming through here, and now he's able to posture up and break this guard open. Oliveira's guard pops open right here. You can see both of his legs separating, and Islam then responds by dropping a big punch here. And Oliveira just has to go back to a defensive position, wrapping up close guard. Great submission defense by Islam to break all of that up. You know, this is happening in split-second increments, and he's just completely shutting down Charles' first two submission attempts. And actually from here, you know, Charles largely went on the defensive and guard. These were his only two moments in the fight where he really had a legit chance at possibly hitting a submission, and he was mostly defensive from here on out. Again, going back to the Fedor versus Nogueira fight, this was very similar. You know, Nogueira would throw up triangles on Fedor. Fedor would defend these by, you know, popping an arm through or trying to shuck his legs off over the top. He was doing that 2 arms in, 2 arms out strategy and really paying a lot of attention to that throughout the fight. And, you know, he would retaliate with a big punch after shrugging off those submission attempts, just like Islam with Oliveira. So the story of Oliveira's guard from here was just largely defensive. He actually threw up this body triangle from the bottom, which when you see a fighter do this, this is highly defensive. They're just trying to keep the person's posture down. They probably feel threatened that there's a ground and pound threat or possibly breaking their guard by posturing up. So this is largely like a stall position, or, you know, a position to kind of rest and recover and to tie the other person up and break the rhythm and timing. And Islam just kept trying to push into his guard, stacking it over and over, lifting Oliveira's hips up off the ground and really neutralizing a lot of the threat here. Islam kept this high head position up near Oliveira's armpit, which would prevent any neck attacks. And Oliveira couldn't really do a lot with this. He was just being stacked over and over again. Islam wasn't allowing his arms to be isolated, and Oliveira was mostly defensive. So one more frame here. Islam, when he could, would push Oliveira to the fence and just continue to really drive his feet into the mat. You can actually see his toes down here a little bit gripping into the mat. Him just driving forward into Oliveira's guard here, not letting him close this closed guard, not letting him shift his hips off to the side for any attacks, and just keeping both arms in or out and just essentially shutting down Oliveira's submission attempts and aggressive guard. He was just not going to allow anything to happen here by continuously pressuring and stacking this guard with good posture and good hand position. So eventually they ended up back on the feet, and this is where a lot of really interesting, juicy details come in. So pay attention to this because this is going to get good. So Oliveira pushes into him. He shoots a takedown, or kind of a body lock, pushing him towards the fence here. And they end up on the fence, and right as Islam is hitting the fence, that's where this frame was captured right here, this screenshot. Right as they're hitting the fence, he sneaks in this underhook. They hit the fence, and as they hit it, he starts to swing this arm up underneath for the underhook. Really slick. So as he does that, he gets this underhook, and he also starts to bring this hand up to the head to get some head control. And Charles isn't in a great position here. He went from, you know, that body lock driving pressure in, but now Islam is starting to get control before he is. So Islam establishes this partial tie clinch position to get head control and posture control, and he starts to sneak that hand that was an underhook to the inside. So going back to the previous frame, he had this underhook. He's going to snake this on the inside to the tie clinch. So he's got one hand here, this other hand is starting to come in, and he gets the full tie clinch here, and he throws a knee. Now this is going to be really important for him to throw this a knee to start introducing a new threat to Charles, that he may be vulnerable to knees in this clinch, and to give him something else to think about. So right away when Islam is pressed into the fence, he immediately grabs an underhook, tie clinch, swims it to the inside, completes the tie clinch with both hands, and throws a knee. So far Charles has done nothing offensive here except shoot the takedown or the clinch position to the fence. In the last video I had mentioned that Islam will not accept bad positions. He immediately fights you. He does not concede position almost ever in any of his fights. He's always doing little things. Even if it doesn't look like he's doing much, he's always doing something to get better position. And right here he's got Oliveira thinking about multiple things going on. He lost the underhook or the overhook battle. He got the tie clinch. He's got posture control. He's breaking down Oliveira's posture, and he's hitting him with a knee. So Oliveira responds by trying to push his hips towards Islam to try to get more of an upright posture here. He's pushing his chest into him, not allowing Islam to break him down in this round back position that he was in before. So he's got more of this upright position, trying to push his hips in to hopefully break this tie clinch, and you can see his fingers starting to separate here, and he's also trying to dig in this underhook. So Charles is able to get the underhook here. He breaks that tie clinch off of his neck. He's in a lot better position now, able to start pushing into Islam. But again, Islam is doing little things here to set up future moves. He starts to get this inside bicep tie, which he can use to keep Charles' arm away from, you know, locking up a body lock, or maybe throwing up a sudden submission attempt, or trying to snap him down to throw up a sudden submission attempt, or to throw elbows or punches. This little movement right here does a lot. It also allows him to just to track his movement in general and get a feel for where he's going to shift his body weight. So again, Islam's being pressured, but he's doing a lot of little things in between. Okay, so check this out. This is where the genius of Islam's game really comes in. This is brilliant how he does this. So pay close attention here. He starts to track this outside arm here. So he went from the bicep to the outside of his arm, his forearm area, wrist area, keeping track of this arm. Now, there's some space here that's opened up. So what Islam's going to do here is throw a knee. Now, what that does, obviously, is when it hits Oliveira in the stomach, because he's not able to defend it, he's got one arm tied up here and he's got the underhook over here. He just has to take this shot directly in the stomach, which is going to push his body backwards and create space in between them. So as this space opens up, look what Islam's hips do. They're now pointing this way. He decides to start twisting his body. You can see the UFC logo on his shorts here. So going back to the previous frame here, he's squared up with him, hitting him with the knee. But as soon as he hits him with the knee and this space opens up, he shifts his hips this way. So now they're pointing the opposite way. Again, their hands are tied up here. He's got the underhook. Oliveira responds by throwing his own knee. And this was really good bait by Islam, because usually, you know, when you guys are tied up like this in the clinch, you'll see one guy throw a knee and the other guy will just kind of respond by throwing his own knee in retaliation. But that's a bait that Islam likes to set up. So as you can see, when he throws this knee, Islam is already moving this foot into position with his hips pointing this way. As soon as this leg comes back to the ground, his foot comes back to the ground after that knee, Islam is already stepping over with this leg that he was swinging through, and his hips are in perfect position to hit the hip throw. So he baited the knee by throwing his own knee and creating space to shift his hips. Oliveira responds with a knee, and as soon as this foot comes down, like it's not even touching the ground here yet fully, he's already stepping through to hit the hip throw. I'd mentioned in the previous video that one of the things that makes Islam really difficult to deal with is that he can hit throws and trips from positions that are typically safe for other fighters. So their hands are tied up here. Oliveira has an underhook. You know, if you're a fighter that likes to shoot a lot of double legs and drop to the legs, you obviously can't do that here because you're tied up, right? But due to Islam's diverse takedown arsenal and being able to throw trips and hip throws and things like that, and all these takedowns with his hands tied up, it gives Oliveira a false sense of security, and boom, he falls right into the trap and he hits the hip throw. They land on the ground. The fence stops him from going over the top. Islam also has this hand tied up, which is going to come into play in the next frame. He's able to push this arm out of the way and start to dig an underhook here. And again, he's in half guard position. He's got this leg in between his own. Islam prefers this position to work from half guard. Lands right in and off the throw. And as soon as he does, he starts to separate this arm from Charles' body and starts to dig his head in underneath the armpit and plant it to the mat here to kind of look for this arm triangle position, which would come in later. So he was already looking for this early on and felt a vulnerability here. If he can get to half guard, he can start opening up Charles' elbow. Now that was significant because in the last analysis that I did, I brought up the fact that Kevin Lee was able to hold Charles down in half guard and separate his arms from his body. You know, Kevin had an underhook over here. This arm got separated from his body. And also here, he was able to dig his arm underneath, which, you know, if Kevin brought his arm or his head underneath and planted it to the mat here, he could get a very similar position to the one Islam had here, hunting for the arm triangle. So that's one of the things I noticed with Charles, is that he tends to get stuck in half guard and his arm starts to get separated from his body. So another fight I want to compare this to was the fight between Islam and Arman. They had their wrists tied up here. They have this under and overhook battle going on both sides. And they have a lot of space between them, and it may seem like Arman is in a safe position. You know, the hands are tied up, they have distance, there's no threat of the takedown. But, you know, Arman makes the decision here of throwing a knee, and Islam keys off that knee just like he did with Oliveira, and hits that trip right away. You know, hands are tied up, he doesn't need his hands. He can shift his body weight based off what the opponent does and where they put their weight, you know, and hit these takedowns. It's just part of his incredible takedown arsenal, and this can be super deceptive. This changes everything, and it changes the game because you're never actually safe. It's very deceptive. You could go down at any time from a variety of angles, so there's always something to worry about, even if you as the opponent think you're safe. So as round 2 starts, Oliveira pushes in again with that aggressive, high-pressure style, coming right at him, looking to throw a front kick. But again, that lead hand with Islam is always probing, you know, collecting data in a way on the distance of the opponent and the things that are being thrown at him. And he uses it to parry these front kicks like this. And this removes a major weapon of Oliveira's. You know, he can't create distance with this. He can't inflict damage with body shots because Islam steps back and parries. You know, looking at the last one, if you look where his feet are at and in relation to this line of the octagon, you can see that he starts right here, and in the next frame, his foot is back here. So he steps back, and as he steps back in that kick, fails to reach him, he also parries it out this way to the side, and just throws it to the side here. So he's removed a major weapon of Oliveira's with that lead hand, which is just invaluable, obviously, with Oliveira's game. They step in after that. Islam counters with a left hand that misses, but then he comes back over the top with that right hook and clips Oliveira in the head with it. Oliveira was open to that right hook, as I said, with Poirier repeatedly, and that was one of the favorite punches here of Islam. Islam also uses this punch to set up takedowns, but that's another story. So from there, Islam circles out this way and ends up planting his foot to throw this high kick. So already in the span of 13 seconds here, Islam has backed up, parried a front kick, retaliated with a left straight which missed, came back with a right hook over the top which landed, circled out this way, but then suddenly stopped and threw a high kick. That's a lot of stuff to think about as the opponents, because your brain is just getting overloaded with all these different things and weird timing that's going on. He's backing up, but then all of a sudden he's back in, he's counter striking, it seems like he's backing up and resetting, but all of a sudden he steps in with a high kick. There's just so much to think about. And that's not even taking his takedown game into account either. So he's overloading the opponent's brain with things to think about. And that's what makes his striking game so good too. A lot of people said they were surprised to see Islam win the striking exchanges. But if you really break down his timing and the variety of things he throws at somebody, he's actually a really good striker. And it seems like the Dagestani guys are just underrated in that regard in general. When Khabib fought Conor, people thought Conor would have the stand-up advantage. And Conor was the one that ended up getting knocked down by Khabib. So Islam has really good stand-up. So he circles out from that high kick this way. And again, he's going to change up his timing, suddenly step in here with that right hook counter over the top. Boom. He hits Charles in the head here. And he's also going to circle out this way. Islam's going to cut an angle on him. So Charles, you can see he ends up way out of position. He ends up stunned from that shot, or at least dazed a little bit. He's out of position here. He has to shoot this leg out to kind of regain his footing. His body's faced this way, and Islam has cut this perpendicular angle on him, ends up on the side, a perfect dominant angle on him after that shot. He uses that angle to grab the tie clinch here, and again, he's just throwing so much stuff. He stepped in with that right hook over the top. Now he's grabbing a tie clinch. Charles was facing that way. Now he's coming back this way. There's just so much going on, and then he throws a knee. Another strike while breaking his posture. And Charles is trying to retaliate by grabbing his own clinch to break his posture, but he's just got a million things to think about. And that's just largely the story here with Islam's stand-up game as a whole. He grabs the full tie clinch here. Charles responds by posturing up and out like this to break that tie clinch, which was a good move because it worked. But then he gave up double overhooks. Every move that Charles made, Islam had an answer for. It's like Charles could not make the right move because every move got him deeper into trouble. So now, he's got these double overhooks here. Charles starts to separate a little bit here to throw an elbow over the top. But again, this is going to get used against him. So he's gonna throw this elbow this way. But as he does that, it's not really in a great position to hit Islam. And Islam responds by using that motion to shoot this underhook over the top. So Charles is actually giving up position. His feet aren't in a great spot here. He's off balance, and Islam gets this underhook because of it. So now he's got the underhook, he's got the overhook on this side, and Islam eventually pushes him towards the cage here. Now, something to pay attention to here is this leg that he likes to snake in between the legs to threaten trips. This is a huge deal too. It's just another thing to think about. I want you to notice here that Charles' back is flush against the fence, and you can start to see Islam's leg snaking in between his, and he pulls Charles' leg out here. It's hard to see because it's blurry because of the motion, but you can see here the separation now between Charles and the fence. Islam snakes that leg on the inside and pulls like a trip. He's going to use it as a hook to pull the leg out, and Charles has to respond by scrambling his feet to regain his balance, and he's in this awkward chair sit position, which is just not optimal for your balance, and he's separated off the fence. Now they go back into the fence. Charles doesn't fall down from it, but again, it's just another thing to think about. Charles brings his hand on the inside to try to frame on Islam's face, and also to kind of throw like a little bit of a short elbow, because Islam is just driving a crazy amount of pressure into him to not allow him to get space. But Charles gets a little bit of space up here, but again, that gets used against him, and Islam shoots the underhook because because his arm, you know, came off the fence here to frame on Islam's face. So that opened up this arm to snake on the inside up underneath his armpit. You can see his arm shooting up underneath Oliveira's as he throws this elbow slash frame on his face to try to create space. So now Islam has a body lock. So again, you know, you're seeing the pattern here. Every time Oliveira makes a move, it works against him. Something just always gets him into deeper trouble. Islam always has an answer. He grabs the body lock and now he throws him this way, and now he's got to think about the takedown this way. He posts his hand, catches his balance, you know, is able to come back up onto the fence, but now they're leaning this way. So in the last frame, he took him this way, and in this one, now we're going back this way, and he's starting to snake that leg in again. It's just a constant brain overload. It's tiring to even analyze it. I'm like, man, there's so much stuff being thrown at Charles. There's always something to think about, high or low, or it's, you know, in the middle to the body. There's always something going on. They end up separating here, and check out this exchange. So Charles steps in to throw a punch this time, and this time he gets the outside foot position, which puts Islam on the inside. You know, as you saw before, Islam likes to step on the outside there and get the dominant angle, but Charles starts to get a better angle here, which would allow him to shoot this right up the middle, and this is going to be a great spot for Charles to throw the punch. But Islam's brain works really, really fast, and he is not afraid to dart out of danger when he doesn't have the right foot position, when he doesn't have the dominant angle, and that's exactly what he does. He parries with this with his rear hand as Charles steps in. He's already stepping back, and he steps all the way back here out of range, doesn't get hit by the punch. Charles squares his hips up towards Islam, which is not great. He comes out of his stance, essentially, chasing Islam, and Islam sits down on this punch and starts to throw a counter. He throws the counter left over the top, and it just nails Charles. You can see his feet coming off the ground here. He just nails him squared up, you know, out of his stance, runs right into the counter with a hard shot. And then he follows it up again with a right hook over the top. That punch he was just landing over and over again while also circling out to create an angle. So Charles, you can see here, is still facing this way. He hasn't even had time to react yet to this big shot that he got hit by here, and Islam is already gone, cutting an angle again. Just masterful striking by Islam here. You can see they've separated here, and Islam is on a completely different side of the cage now from where they started. And a good attack attempt by Charles just ends up getting used against him again. Counter strike, and he's gone. So as you can see, Islam just creates this huge brain overload. He's throwing a million things at you. You're worried about trips. You're worried about overhooks, underhooks, right hooks, left hooks, counter striking. He's aggressive all of a sudden. He's passive. He's darting out. He's cutting an angle. He's throwing a high kick. He's throwing a knee. It's just so much to think about, you know, and that's just a real cornerstone of his game, and that's why he's going to be so difficult for anybody to deal with him. So let's look at the finish now and what led up to the finish. So Charles comes at Islam throwing a big knee here, you know, has a big attack attempt with his aggressive, you know, exciting style. You know, it's what makes him great, but it's also ended up being his undoing. So he steps in with this big knee attempt, and Islam immediately retaliates with that punch that he was landing all fight. That right hook over the top is just coming in, and Charles is kind of a sitting duck here, you know, squared up face to face with him here. Bam, lands a big right hook, and down they go to guard. Islam again starts to establish this tripod passing position, head high in the armpit, no chance at any guillotines or neck attacks. Plus Oliveira is stunned in this position. He's got Oliveira's leg in between his own, starting to pass around this way in the exact position that he wants to be in. From the other angle, he's got this head high into the armpit now. He's got this arm starting to separate from Oliveira's body, exposing the arm. He's bringing in that hard shoulder pressure, flattening Oliveira's shoulders out on the mat, reducing his ability to make escapes. Oliveira would ideally like to get on one of his hips, get on his side, and to hopefully snake his hips out, but in this position it's almost impossible with this pressure that Islam is putting on Oliveira and the positioning that he has with his own body. Again, he continues to pry this arm up, and he's looking to lock his hands together to get that arm triangle position. So here he gets the arm triangle grip. Charles' arm is way above his head. It's looking real bleak for Charles at this point, but he still has leg control. There still may be a glimmer of hope. You know, sometimes you can butt guys off and roll them. But I want to show something that happened earlier in the fight because it comes into play right here at the end. So earlier in the fight, Islam had this position with the heavy shoulder pressure in the half guard position, and Charles started to use this hand to post on the side of his body for an escape. Charles would generate momentum here by bucking his hips upward and framing on his hip so that Islam would not be able to bring this knee any higher. So it would allow him to create space by bucking his hips up, keep that leg down, and hopefully snake his hips out. And you can see here that Charles did get to his side, and he's still holding this leg so that Islam cannot advance it higher. And so he's got all this space right here. So earlier in the fight, it was working pretty well to escape half guard like this against Islam. You can see here that Charles starts to get his own knee out with the space that he's created in this frame that he has holding this leg from coming up and in, as I said before. So he starts to get this leg out, and he gets it further and further out, again still holding this knee right here, and eventually he gets into a better position here to where Islam has now been pushed down. He's not as high up on him as he was, you know, with this shoulder pressure on his neck, and Charles is able to more easily recover the close guard. And at one point here, Charles even does something pretty crafty where he grabs his own shin to help him roll this way to make this leg light so it can come out from underneath Islam and regain the close guard. And you can see here that earlier in the fight, he completely locked it up. So again, using this hand to push on the hip, he initiated that escape and got out of half guard and got back to close guard. So going back to the finish now, Islam is you know, got this arm triangle position, looks pretty bad. And Charles is looking for that hand on the hip again to maybe, you know, buck this way and get out of here. But Islam makes an adaptation this time. He puts his shin on his thigh, which helps him go with the momentum of the incoming escape this way. And he can also use it to windshield wiper his leg, which would be moving his leg this way. He wants to jump off to this side of Oliveira to finish the arm triangle. So this leg position has multiple functions. It allows him to roll with Charles' escape attempt, but it also allows him to get off this way more easily and avoid his leg being entangled in Charles's legs and allowing him to get half guard and tying him up. So right here, Charles starts to buck his hips like that earlier attempt. He's got that hand near the hip to hopefully block him from coming up any higher. But as he rolls, because of that leg position that Islam had, he's able to post his leg quickly, to post his foot on the mat. And you can see Charles trying to push off on this knee, but Islam has a ton of stability at this point. He's got him wrapped up with that arm triangle position, and he's got his foot planted now. So then again, you know, a move that Oliveira makes to hopefully save himself gets used against him. He pushes on this knee, and as he pushes this way, Islam uses the momentum from the push to jump off to the other side and completely clear the legs. So Oliveira wasn't able to push that leg in between his own. He would like to have captured that leg in between his own to get half guard secured, but Islam used that momentum to hop over the top of him and secure the arm triangle position. And as soon as he landed, Charles knew the fight was over, and you can see that tap coming in right away. So again, just stamping the fight by using something that Oliveira tried to do offensively, or in this case defensively, to get himself out, but instead sunk himself deeper with Islam's reaction. And that was mainly the story of this entire fight. Just a brilliant cerebral performance by Islam Makhachev. Big respect to Charles Oliveira, an amazing champion himself, but ultimately I think this was just a really bad style matchup for Charles on paper, and really Islam is a bad style matchup for most people in the UFC. I'd seen some people saying that they were surprised by what Islam did in the striking versus, you know, Poirier, Gaethje, Chandler, and that he did better than all of them. And really, when you break down the intricacies of it, it's really not that surprising. And honestly, Islam might be the best striker at 155 pounds because of how he's able to mix things up and all the threats that he presents. It's a lot to deal with for anybody, and I can't wait to see the fight against Volkanovski coming up. I'll have a breakdown for that one as well. But for now, I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you in the next one.